This video will contain spoilers for the original Final Fantasy VII, Remake, Rebirth, and events yet to be covered in Part 3. Please proceed with caution if you don't want the potential events of the upcoming game spoiled. Please be respectful to each other and let's put our energy into creating positive discussion. I hope you enjoy. Right, settle in because I feel like this might be a long one. Let's be honest right out of the gates here. Game development in 1997 seemed like it was tough. Gaming in general was still in its infancy, and what Squaresoft managed to do with Final Fantasy VII in the face of hardware and business limitations was monumental. They created a world that seemed to have infinite depth and mystery that's kept us captivated and inspired for the better part of 3 decades at this point. I wouldn't be here making this video 28 years later if what they'd achieved back then was anything short of truly legendary. But I wouldn't be telling the whole truth if I said I believed that the work they were doing now in Remake and Rebirth is just expanded from already established world building that's been kept under some kind of lock and key all these years. In fact, we've recently been told by the series director himself that there's almost no documentation left over from that period. I believe they've done an amazing job expanding on a solid foundation and achieved a real depth of world building that was only suggested to us in 1997. It may have been a bit more smoke and mirrors than our rose-tinted glasses would lead us to believe, but what we have now feels like a living, breathing world with an expansive history and depth. Let's explore that a bit today. We'll take a look at Final Fantasy VII specifically, for a change, I know, huh? And how summons have evolved to be woven into the very fabric of the game's world so intrinsically that they may be shaping up to be a big part of the story itself for Part 3. Buckle up, this one's going to be full of speculation. Generally at first, and we'll finish it off with a nice spicy theory about how they could be a huge part of Part 3. I really hope you enjoy. Summons have played a big part in almost every Final Fantasy game. As a mechanic, you'd think they'd always take similar forms, but that couldn't be further from the truth. In the original Final Fantasy VII, summons took the form of once-off, hard-hitting attacks that took up a materia slot in your weapon, or armour. Compare this to Final Fantasy X, where you actually get to play as the summon in an entirely summon-centric storyline and world. Then we have Final Fantasy XVI, where you are the summon. Or Final Fantasy VIII, where the divisive junction system allowed characters to channel XP into summons to learn powerful moves and abilities, and create playing cards, of course. Point being, when you look at a summon, whether you see a behemoth fire god or a dragon knight, the series can handle them in a variety of different ways, ranging from them being damage-dealing attacks to them being the central driving force of the entire plotline and established world. We've already touched on it, but summons in the original Final Fantasy VII were primarily damage dealers. Wielded like a magma cannon, Ifrit leaves scorched earth in his wake. Shiva would freeze enemies to the spot and Fat Chocobo would sit on you or something, I don't know. Summons in the original were largely just really cool animations. 9-year-old me was completely wowed by them and used them religiously. Realistically, they were some of the most awesome graphics the world had ever seen at the time. But now that I'm older, I realise if I'd been levelling my party up properly, that they probably would have become less useful far quicker. That's not to say that some didn't have their uses. I'll never forget using Odin to one-shot the dragons in the mural hallway in the Temple of the Ancients. Demon's Gate still haunts my dreams, so I had some grinding to do if I was ever going to beat him. The summons were a safety net to deal mega damage when you needed them. But when it comes to the storyline, they were largely absent outside of battles. In fact, I'm not sure the summons themselves are referenced at all, as anything other than materia in the original. There are narrative nuances we can glean if we look really deep, but for me, it never felt that you were supposed to link the summons to the world in the original. They were materia, and that was that. But for now, let's stick to summons and see how they've evolved seamlessly into the very fabric of the game world in Remake and Rebirth. Wait, hang on. We need to talk here for a minute before we get too deep. I think it's important that we fully define what a summon is in the world of Final Fantasy VII before we go any further. Summons are attacks that summon powerful enemies to do one-off damage, all kinds of damage. Elemental, physical, status effect, even instant death in some cases. But what is materia? Jesus, this rabbit hole could go deep. For that one, let me hand you over to Sephiroth.
To put it simply, the knowledge of the ancients is sealed within each orb. That knowledge not only connects us to the planet, it allows us to tap into her power. That's how we can use magic. Or so they say.
Materia is crystallized life stream. But what is the life stream? Oh, okay. That's deep enough for now. The life stream, that's for another video entirely. All materia is crystallized life stream. That much we know, but we're not summoning Faraga or Tundaga to attack our enemies. The game tells us that green materia is the knowledge of the ancients that can be called upon in battle. The word summon for me suggests that we're pulling them from somewhere else. The distinction with summon materia as I see it is twofold. Firstly, it's another class of magic in the game from a programming and gameplay perspective. They're one powerful spell that take up a materia slot when space in your weapon is at a premium. But on a second, deeper, more artistic and world building level, summons aren't just like any other materia as far as I'm concerned. They feel distinctly more than green materia. Where green materia allows us to call on the knowledge of the ancients, summons are entities. They can't be merely crystallized lifestream because they're not just knowledge. They could potentially be a collective memory of a legendary beast or king or entity that the ancients revered. But for me, summons seem distinct from green magic. Maybe we're plucking the mind, body and soul from the lifestream to aid us. So, the natural progression from this point as I see it, is that these entities must have really existed at some point to be crystallized lifestream. And what if one of them still does? There's two specific aspects of Rebirth that led to this video's creation. As per usual, I was several playthroughs deep in Remake and Rebirth, and having digested the fire hose of information this game throws at you, I had time to take a leisurely stroll through Rebirth, taking in its sights and sounds, reading all of its menus, infos and journal entries when I noticed something curious about the summons and their assess data. Each and every bestiary entry for a summon in Rebirth starts with the line, "A summon recreated in virtual reality." I feel like I say this a lot, but on its own, this might not seem strange. However, there's a few points that make it more of a big deal than it might seem at first. First and foremost,
it's so good to see you again, Cloud.
Chaley. We haven't talked about him yet in my videos, but I think it's time. Chaley, as I'm sure you're all aware during Remake and Rebirth, is the character that delivers most of the open world content to the player. The vast majority of materia discovery happens through him. He acts as a pseudo Loremaster in Rebirth, his open world challenges being what give us the backstory and world building for each area. Curiously, he's also the one delivering us the summons through the game. Both in Remake and Rebirth, once we've collected enough intel for Chaley, he'll give us a new challenge, a VR fight with a summon, and the reward is the summon materia itself for use in battle. For some people this is a sticking point. In the original we were left to organically find summon materia at points throughout the game, but in Remake and Rebirth they're researched by the player and produced by Chaley. If I'm honest, I do wish there was a more natural way to come across summon materia in Remake and Rebirth. But like I've said before, I'm the kind of fan of the series that likes to ask why, and that why led me to an interesting question. What if there was an indicator that summons did exist physically at one stage? And what if that indicator was staring at us on the horizon all the way through Rebirth, perched on top of a destroyed Mako reactor? According to Wiki, condors have an average wingspan of 2.7 to 3.1 meters. Now, I'm no ornithologist, but the condor in Rebirth seems to have very slightly more than that. Looming in the distance, the condor sits on its horizon like a sentinel watching over its land. We know that in the original, the condor is sitting on top of a defunct Mako reactor protecting an egg. When we defend the reactor from a Shinra attack in the mid-game, the condor inexplicably dies as its egg hatches, curiously leaving us a Phoneix materia. Considering these points, combined with the fact that the reactor was home to a huge materia, things start to get more interesting. The conscious decision to keep us away from the condor in Rebirth isn't lost on me. The quest dreaming of blue skies is the best look we get at it, and let me tell you, while I can understand why the locals call it a condor, I think it might be something else entirely. Chapter 4's quest makes it clear to us that the condor only occasionally leaves its perch to feed, and the best option for food to give it at the end of the quest is cow's meat. To me, this suggests that the being is sustained not only by regular food, but by energy it can absorb from the ruined reactor. A being this size couldn't exist on a single cow occasionally, so it must be getting energy from somewhere. Putting all of this together, we come to an interesting conclusion. The condor silently perched atop a Mako reactor on the horizon might not be a condor at all. In fact, since the original, I've believed it might be a Phoneix. The context added by Rebirth made me take this idea further. Now, I don't think it's just any Phoneix, but the Phoneix. The Phoneix that has existed since the time of the ancients, feeding off the planet's resources in an endless cycle of birth, death, and rebirth. Clearly it's extremely old and fading in Rebirth. It made its home in the middle of the ocean on a destroyed Mako reactor so it could protect the huge materia in the waters there. It continues to sustain itself from the planet's energy, endlessly using the power of the lifestream to keep itself alive, only to return all of that energy when it dies and start the life cycle over anew. Roosted away from humanity, protecting its egg and the source of energy for that egg's growth, the huge materia, until it's ready to burst into flames and start its cycle again. A perfectly sustaining creature that is potentially the oldest living creature in the world of Final Fantasy VII right now. How it will help us in Part 3, we'll have to wait and see. A more powerful summon because the entity itself still exists, supporting the final battle against Jenova and Sephiroth, or something else entirely. Let me know what you think in the comments. So if any of this is true, what could that mean for the other summons? None of them are lucky enough to be universally recognised as beings that can die and be reborn, but a couple of them, like Odin and Alexander, are described as almost godlike entities in the world. Gilgamesh even becomes a summon later for us in the game, even though he's an NPC throughout, further cementing the idea that summons are more than just memories in the livestream. We even see Gilgamesh being summoned by Sephiroth in one of the final proto-relic scenes. A mysterious scene with far-reaching implications for sure. Not only this, but we see Sephiroth summoning Bahamut and Bahamut Arisen as Whisper versions. Could these be corrupted livestream summons? Sephiroth using the power he's gained to summon mirrored anti-versions of once revered and beloved heroes? Who knows, but it's definitely fun to think about. Or not fun, because it could mean we're going to see dark summons again in Part 3, and those of you who remember fighting those in Final Fantasy X are probably panicking right now.
Infidel!
Going into Part 3, we only have Bahamut Zero, Typhon, Knights of the Round, and Hades left to find, which doesn't leave us a lot to work with, but 3 of them are easily the most powerful summons in the game's world by a long shot. Maybe this idea could lead us to revisiting some of the summons we've already gotten in a deeper, more mechanically fleshed out way in Part 3. This would make perfect sense, because it's a great way to justify the removal of the summons we already have, while simultaneously evolving the mechanic for Part 3. Who knows, maybe Part 3 will take a leaf out of Final Fantasy X's book and let us play as them. So we've taken a pretty brief look at summons across the series and seen how those trends could feed into Part 3. Rebirth has done a stellar job of setting up some potentially very interesting plot points to be explored in Part 3. All we have to do now, unfortunately, is wait. One thing is for sure though, at least a title reveal is getting closer and closer. My money's on the Game Awards next month. When do you think they're going to reveal it? And what do you think the name is going to be? Because that's been a sticking point. The potential evolution for the combat in Part 3 is something we'll surely cover in another video. As always at this point, I'd like to extend a heartfelt thank you if you've stuck around for this long. I appreciate each and every view, and I appreciate you spending some of your internet time with me today, more than you could know. I really enjoy making these videos, so if you consider subscribing, I would very much appreciate it. Our budding community welcomes anyone who hits that subscribe button, and I hope to see you in the next one. Have a great one, guys.